Perfect. Thank you. My name is Jamie Mosler. I'm an associate planner for the City of Sacramento. And tonight, as part of our 2040 general plan and zoning consistency work, we're talking about missing middle housing. I'm joined with some other city staff as well tonight. This is part of our webinar series we're doing as part of our 2040 general plan and zoning consistency work. We had two webinars, one on an overview of the project, one on neighborhood commercial. Those are both available to watch on our website. Tonight, we'll be talking about missing middle housing, and then next week, we'll be talking about new zones and rezoning. As an overview of this presentation, I'll first start with some background information about the project, how we got here. I'll then turn it over to Tony Perez from Opticos Design to walk us through the draft missing middle housing standards. We'll then have time after Tony presents for Q&A and to get your input. And then following that, I'll conclude with briefly describing our outreach strategy and ways that you can stay involved with the project as it moves forward. All right, starting with some background information. I'm probably familiar, but the 2040 general plan was adopted by City Council and has several policies that guide the city's decision-making around development. This document also sets the stage to implement those policies through more detailed planning efforts, such as the zoning code update that we're working on now. The general plan was centered around this vision that in 2040, the city would be a national model of sustainable, equitable growth and community development. Along with these 6 guiding principles, these really shape the general plan and continue to shape the zoning code update work that we're doing now. You might guess with the name like the general plan that this is a longer term general document, but it's implemented through many city programs and tools such as the zoning code, which is more shorter term and specific. And state law requires the general plan and the zoning code to be consistent, which is why we're going through an update to our code right now. So what is zoning? Zoning divides all the land within the city into different areas or zones. There's agricultural zones, residential zones, commercial zones, industrial zones. They all allow different types of uses and development and have rules for what can be built. And these rules are really intended to make sure that different land uses are all working well together throughout the city. Our zoning code update has been going in through 4 phases. So we were in analysis for a bit, going through our whole code, seeing what changes we needed to make. Now we're in community engagement, bringing those proposed changes to the community in forums like this to get your input, which will then inform the draft ordinance that we prepare in the fall that we bring forward to the Planning and Design Commission and City Council in the fall and winter of this year. There's 7 items in our scope, but tonight we're just going to be focusing on updating missing middle housing standards and focusing growth near transit. The general plan provides direction to do this work to remove maximum residential density and replace it with FAR-based standards, to broaden the range of housing types allowed by right and single unit and duplex dwelling zones, to update development standards for missing middle housing types, and to promote a variety of housing types, including neighborhood scale multi-unit buildings. And I'll kind of walk through what this means. So historically, Sacramento's residential areas had a range of housing types all built right next to each other. I think we can picture areas of Midtown on the grid where you have duplexes, triplexes, and small apartment buildings right next to single family homes. But over time, our zoning changed and limited a lot of the land in the city to be just one single family house per lot. And so why a lot of our neighborhoods across the city look like this is because the zoning facilitated that. But having less multifamily housing options over time and so much of our land dedicated just to single family housing has contributed to, housing crisis, less options, affordability challenges. And so in response to that, the 2040 general plan provides direction to broaden the range of housing types in those areas where only single unit dwellings were allowed for a long time. And that's where we get to what missing middle housing is. And that's one of the ways general plan wants us is to allow missing middle housing. It's defined as buildings with more than one home, such as duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage courts, usually built in neighborhoods with single family homes. And Tony will expand on that more in his presentation. We had an interim ordinance to allow missing middle housing that was adopted by City Council in summer of 2024. So it's always adopted as a temporary step before complete code update, which we're at now. This ordinance allows duplexes, multi-unit dwellings, and smaller lot sizes in those single unit and duplex zones that I showed on the slide a moment ago. But now we're looking at doing updates in line with our 2040 general plan, which removed maximum residential density limits across the entire city. There's no longer a limit on how many houses or units can be built on one lot. And the general plan uses floor area ratio instead. So instead of having like 1 unit per lot, we have FARs ranging from 1 through 15 across the city. Floor area ratio is is building area divided by lot area. So for example, if you had a 5,000 square foot lot with a 5,000 square foot building on that, that would be an FAR of 1. But a 15,000 square foot building on that same lot would be an FAR of 3. So now the general plan regulates the size of the box, not necessarily how many housing units are within it. The general plan also allows the higher FARs near transit. So you'll see the lighter colors are further from transit, that light yellow, and our darker colors are along where the light rail is and getting closer to downtown. So higher development intensity associated with transit. But when we look at mixed middle housing in the areas that we'll be talking about tonight, we're looking at parcels that have either a max FAR of 1, which is mapped there, and all of those yellowish parcels on the left. There's about 100,000 of them. And then we're also looking at parcels with an FAR of 2. There's about 20,000 of those, and those are located closer to transit and where they have the higher FAR. In a similar vein of wanting more development near transit, the state also recently passed SB 79, which became effective this summer. It establishes statewide zoning standards to allow more housing near transit. Within 200 to a half mile of certain transit stops, certain housing projects are eligible for heights from 55 to 85 feet, but they do have to meet certain requirements to be eligible. Has to be a project type housing or mixed use with at least 5 units, has to meet minimum density standards, comply with an average unit size, and then sometimes affordability and labor standards do apply to those projects as well. So taking the direction from our general plan to increase intensity near transit, but also to broaden the range of housing types, and then also looking at new state legislation. We had a workshop with City Council back in April, and now with their direction, we are working on updating our missing middle housing standards to balance neighborhood scale, but also to focus growth near transit and create more housing opportunities in those areas. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Tony Perez from Opticos, to walk us through the draft standards that we've been developing so far.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. Go ahead and take us to the next slide, Jamie, please. So I'm going to give a little more information about missing middle housing and how it's defined and what actually it entails. Next slide. So as Jamie mentioned, this diagram that she showed just a few slides ago, the way we've been describing missing middle housing at Opticos since 2010 is we boiled it down to this: house scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. And generally, multifamily housing, as you know it, is often 1 or 2, but not often 3 of although 3 of those. And missing middle housing is always all 3 in our experience, and that's because of where it's located and what it's located near, and that's what we're going to talk a little more about tonight. But you heard Jamie talk about the different types here, and you can see them in the middle of the diagram. There's simply housing choices that used to exist in neighborhoods pre-1940s, in addition to houses on the left and mid-rise apartments on the right. Next. And this isn't new. If you're sitting there saying, well, I've seen this. I just saw some examples that Jamie showed from Sacramento that predate all of these discussions. You're absolutely right. We're not saying it's new. What is new, unfortunately, is across the country getting these types to be allowed again and allowed predictably and easily by neighborhoods, by developers, by architects, by housing advocates, to get them allowed easily and predictably. These pages are from a Sears catalog in the 1910s, where you could identify your lot width, say 40 feet wide, 50 feet wide, and then go through this catalog and pick out either a duplex or a fourplex or something more if you wanted, but it was already fitted to the lot. And so just to show that this is not a new idea, what's new is making it happen easy again. Next slide. And one of the things that missing middle housing is really known for is that it's always been part of neighborhoods. And in being part of neighborhoods, it's often hard to tell if there are 2 or more units in that building because they're part of neighborhoods that have single unit houses. And so here you're looking at 3 mailboxes or 4 water meters or gas meters showing you that there are multiple units in that building. But otherwise, walking along the street, you'd say it looks like a big house. Next slide. And so just going through briefly here, the key types that there are many variations, of course, but here are some key types. The duplex, a couple of versions of them, side by side and stacked. and a cottage court where there are usually single story units arranged around a garden. And then often, as you see in the picture on the bottom left, the building is a duplex, often maybe sometimes threeplex at the end of the garden. And historically, that type has really provided entry-level housing because of the unit sizes and just the beautiful garden and how it fits in a neighborhood so easily. On the right is its cousin, the courtyard, where it still has a garden in the middle, but the units are flats or well, they're stacked or they're townhouses that are attached around that garden. Next. And then the fourplex, two flats over two, and the multiplex on the right, where it's anywhere between 5 and 10 or 12 units often. And you can see here, this is the largest of the ones I've shown you. And that's one of the other ideas about missing middle housing is that at the largest, these buildings fit in neighborhoods with other large houses and other large buildings. And then the townhouse. Everybody's very familiar with these because they happen more often than all the other ones I was just mentioning. And you can see different variations. Sometimes they're 4 or 5 in a row as on the one on the bottom right, or they're many in a row as long as the block. It just depends on the situation. Next. And then moving up the ladder or the scale here on the spectrum of housing, we go into this category, what we're calling upper missing middle, which is where Sacramento is focusing more of its efforts in trying to achieve more housing. And these buildings are 3 and 4 stories tall, but what they share with the ones that I just showed you is mainly their width. So perceived from the street, they tend to be about as wide, maybe a little wider sometimes than the house scale versions, but they are usually very much deeper into the lot, occupying more of the lot, producing more housing. So some examples from Sacramento. The first of 5 I'm going to show you is a side-by-side duplex. Here, a single-story building fits nicely in a neighborhood. Next. 2 versions of stacked duplexes, so that flat on top of another flat. And a courtyard with multiple units arranged around that garden, that central garden, and it opening onto the street, but providing that semi-private area where their front doors can face the garden and not necessarily the street in this case. Beautiful arrangement. Next. And then a 3-story multiplex. Next. And 3-story townhouses. So as I mentioned, many townhouses are 2 stories, but often you'll find 3-story versions like this. Next. So here we're going to walk you through the draft standards that we've been working on together with the city for the N1 zone. And one of the things when we approach writing standards is, as you would expect, uh, instead of focusing on numbers and all the abstract things that you can focus on, uh, as a team, we've reversed that process. And based on the public input received so far and the direction from City Council, what is it that people are looking for besides more housing and what forms, what shapes, what sizes? And so we started with that and then worked out the numbers that supported those outcomes. And an example of an outcome like that is this multiplex. It's a 3-story sixplex that fits in this neighborhood. Next. Here's a version in a 1.0 area. The previous one was a 1.0 area, a 1.0 FAR area. This one is also a 1.0 FAR area, and it's 6 single story cottages, as I was mentioning earlier in that cottage core type, with a 2-story duplex at the far end of the garden. And this produces 8 units on that lot. Next. And then in the 2.0 areas, there is a lot more floor area to achieve and more housing expected to be achieved in those areas near transit. And so in this case, we are showing a 4-story building, and you can see how its width is similar to the buildings I've been showing you, but its depth is much deeper, as I was mentioning in the upper missing middle. They're deeper into the lot. Next slide. So looking at these closer, the first one, the 1.0 area sixplex, a three-story sixplex, you can see the interim ordinance standards on the left. And the three examples I'm going to show you, the interim ordinance that's currently in effect is in the left-hand column. The proposed N1 standards are in the middle column, and then what you're looking at on the screen is reflected in the shown column. So when you go and look at this video later and study all this information at your own leisure, you can use this structure to look at it. But you can see here that in this example, the height is not changing, but the bulk control that currently is in the interim ordinance is being removed. And so the building is able to achieve 3 stories fully without any hindrances to the floor area, and it can produce 6 nice units in that building with parking in the rear, as you can see on the site plan there. And then it also has open space in the front in form of a front yard, and then a porch added onto that as a feature. Next. In this one, this is a version of the cottage court I showed you earlier, but it's 2-story cottages around the entire garden as opposed to single-story cottages. And you can do either one or you can mix them. We are just showing it for variety. But again, the height in these areas is not changing, but the bulk control is being removed so that these buildings can function as complete buildings without any hindrance from bulk control. And you can see that the height that these buildings need to do that is well within the 35 feet that's allowed by the interim ordinance and the proposed standards. And then you can also see that the open space that is required in the proposed column is far exceeded in this actual example because of the way the garden is oriented on the site. Next slide. And then the third example, that 2.0 area building, this building is enjoying more height because the interim ordinance currently controls it to 35 feet. And again, per council direction to achieve more housing, we are increasing the height in these areas to 45 feet and removing the bulk control requirements. And so this building is able to produce 4 stories and anywhere between 12 and 16 or 18 units, depending on how you divide the square footage inside. Next slide. So one of the first standards is building height. And so here you can see in the chart, in the 1.0 areas, the maximum height is not changing. It's 35 feet. The bulk control is being removed, so it's effectively letting that 35 feet be used far more effectively. In the 2.0 areas, it's going to 45 feet. And then you can see on the diagram on the right how that is measured. And it's really important to see that item B there is measuring to the plate line and not counting the roof. And so I know there was a lot of discussion in the Planning Commission and council meetings about roofs and whether they're required or should be required or not. They are not required. They're still not required. But if you want to add a pitched roof, you can. And you can see the provision here that it is not counted against the height of the building. And as long as it doesn't exceed 20% of the maximum height. And that's easy to do with that number. So the intent is to provide for the ability to provide a pitched roof, but to not require it. Next slide. And so as Jamie mentioned, density limits have been removed, lot coverage requirements are removed, and the lot size requirements you can see there on the screen. And I just would summarize the lot requirements by saying that these standards are worked out to function on all the existing lot sizes that exist, which it takes a lot more work to do that to make sure that everything works, but that's the way to do it instead of um, uh, hoping that people assemble properties to make projects work. So these standards work on the properties that exist. Next slide. So the building setbacks is what we're going to go through next, and you can see that On the left-hand side, if you're going to build up to 2 units, you can see the setback requirements depending on what exists on that block. But at the most, it's going to be a 20-foot setback, which is typical with the houses that are in most of those neighborhoods where these would be allowed. If you're doing 3 or more units, then it's 15 feet. Next slide. And street side yard, that's the side of the lot on a corner lot. And you can see here it's 12.5, which is the current requirement, is my understanding. Next slide. And then side yard, interior side yard and rear. So in the interior side yard on the left there, you can see that depending on what you're building, what you're next to, there might not be any requirement, but chances are there's probably a house next door. And so if there is, it's a 5-foot minimum setback. The rear setback is simply 15 feet. Next. So massing, the next area of requirements. The massing requirements for 1.0 areas are very different than the massing areas for 2.0 areas. So I'm going to talk about the 1.0 areas first. The idea here is that because these buildings are fitting in to neighborhoods of um, uh, houses where the intensity isn't as great as in the 2.0 areas near transit, the idea is to try and to use the term that Jamie used earlier, uh, achieve a neighborhood scale balance in terms of building size. And so one way to do that is to limit the building length in either direction. And we have found that 60 feet accommodates a lot of different sizes of buildings that fit on these lots, as you'll see in the slides that follow. And as an example of that, the photo at the bottom left represents a building about 60 feet wide. Could it be 62? Maybe. I didn't measure it exactly, but my recollection is this building is very close to 60 feet wide. So you can see how wide of a building this accommodates, even though the diagrams tend to give a different picture because of just the way the diagrams were drawn. That's why I included the photo at the bottom left to show you visibly what a 60-foot wide building looks like. Next slide. As an option, not a requirement, but as an option, if your lot has more width or more depth and can accommodate more than 60 feet, then you have the option of adding one or more wings. Wings are these secondary volumes or these additions you can see here in gray identified in the diagrams. And what those let you do is add 1 to 3 more stories in these 1.0 areas, and adding more square footage and adding more units, but doing it in a way where that main body, that area identified by A, still stands out as the main part of the building. And then the other parts of the building are offset from the facade just by a few feet, 3 feet, so that the main body reads as the main part of the building and the other part reads as an addition, and making for a better neighborhood balance with other buildings in the neighborhood. The other thing to note on this slide is the last requirement, the proposed requirement of all stairways being located inside the building. And the reason for that, uh, could it be 14 units, could it be 20 units? The threshold, we're certainly open to input on all these numbers and all these requirements. But the idea is that we've found when fitting buildings into neighborhoods that exterior stairs on the sides and on the fronts tend to evoke images of apartment building projects that may be very nice in other contexts, but in neighborhoods often face resistance because people are feeling that an apartment building development and all the things that they think are associated with that in terms of number of units and number of buildings, that it's coming, that's what's happening. And so we found that by requiring the stairs to be inside the building, that does not give the same impression. And so the buildings that we're showing you tonight all have interior stairs. And so I just wanted to give some background on that intent. Next slide. So here is that first visualization that we've been talking about on that in the 1.0 area. Uh, in this case, you can see the site plan on the bottom right. The building, after you put parking in the back and a driveway down the side, yields a building 38 feet wide by 45 feet deep on this lot that's 61 feet wide by 109 feet deep, and 3 stories, 35 feet, 6 units, and it achieves an FAR of 0.75. Could you divide the square footage to achieve 8 units? Sure, that's up to the applicant. Thankfully, because the density requirements are removed, we have been assuming a unit size anywhere between 600 and 1,000 square feet, depending on the situation. Next slide. Massing in 2.0 areas. So as I mentioned, it's very different. The idea in 2.0 areas is to achieve even more housing because the 2.0 areas are that much closer to transit. And so the expectation is higher in these transit proximate areas. And so in these areas, the buildings can be much wider than in the 1.0 areas. So in the 1.0 areas, they're up to 60 feet. In 2.0 areas, they're up to 80 feet wide, and then they can be up to 120 feet deep, as I was mentioning earlier with upper missing middle category. And one of the standards that we're recommending is that buildings that are over 75 feet long, so if your building was 74 feet, you wouldn't have to do what I'm going to describe. But if it's 75 feet or more, up to 80 feet, then one of these 5 massing option choices needs to be applied to the building. First one is a massing break. So you can either recess into the building or you can project from the building. What's shown here in that area identified by B is a projection of 1 foot by 30 feet long. And the idea there is instead of recessing it and affecting the floor plan inside and the yield of housing units, the projection of 1 foot still works on a lot of these narrower lots. It gives you a massing break and does not hurt the floor plan inside. It does not lower the yield of housing. The other thing to mention here is the 30 feet that you're going to see in the following standards, the other options. It's it's a number that we have found works with construction systems. So could it be 25 in Sacramento because of the way construction systems are done there? Sure. What we found though consistently is 30 feet works with a lot of construction systems and assumptions about structure. And so we're recommending 30 feet, but we're certainly open to that. Next slide. So 2 more options of the 5. If you don't want to do that projection or recess that I was just describing, another option is to change the window proportions or window sizes, probably another way to say it. And you can see in the middle of this diagram, the windows are taller and they're a little bit wider than the windows to the left and the right. And the requirement is just 3 inches. So we're just showing it in the diagram to uh, make it obvious, make it clear for you viewers, but it's just 3 inches that's required. And then another option is to recess the windows. So you can have all the same windows across the facade, but you need to recess them 3 inches from the main wall. Next slide. So then options 4 and 5 for building that's 75 feet or more, or over 75 feet, are changing exterior materials. You can see that in the diagram, or adding balconies. And you can add Juliet or non-occupiable balconies, however you call them. But you can add those and to a maximum 50% of the elevation. And the idea there is to not put so many balconies that uh, it it does the similar thing to the stairs. It communicates a much more intense building than was intended. So the balconies are offered as an option to break up the facade, but to not make it look like a more intense building. So that's why there's a maximum 50%. And the other thing here is that if you want occupiable balconies where somebody could sit out there and occupy the balcony, then we're recommending that a setback of 10 feet be required so that it would minimize overviewing onto other properties. Next slide. And so here's a visualization of one of those 2.0 area buildings. And you could see how much deeper it is than the first building I was showing you in the 1.0 areas, and obviously 1 story taller with 4 stories. And you can see that massing break, that projection of 1 foot applied. And in this case, we're showing also a change in window proportion as well, even though just one of those two techniques would be required, not both of those. But this on this lot of 55 feet wide by 160 feet deep, a 1.62 FAR is achieved in 4 stories. And there's parking in the back. You can see surface parking, and then there's tuck under parking in the rear of this building. And more units could be achieved if the developer wanted to divide the square footage a certain way, but we were assuming about 1,000 square feet, somewhere a little under that. So anywhere between 12 and 16 units could fit here comfortably in this building, if not more, depending again on the unit size. And then balancing the parking. There's no parking requirement, but we have been using the term expected parking uh, in terms of some developers want to provide parking. And so what might that be? And so this is a scenario assuming, I think, parking spaces at zero point 0.6 space per unit. Next slide. So then the next set of requirements is addressing the streetscape or the public realm, as some people call it. And these requirements require that at least one entry from the building face a street or required open space. And these standards provide 4 options. There's the porch in the top left photo. It can be single story or double story, as in this example. There's a dooryard, which is another way to say an at-grade patio with a little low privacy fence there to provide the semi-private area in front of each unit facing the street or an open space, or a stoop, a semi-private area where somebody could put a chair out, hang out there and watch people go by or walk by, and just a little elevated from the street in exchange for being closer to the sidewalk. And then the fourth one, the common entries. Some buildings, as I was showing you just the last one, the site visualization, uses a common entry where all the units are entered through a small lobby and they enjoy this shared entry that gives identity to the building and also gives coverage during bad weather. Next slide. And then the requirements here are on the right, you can see the width minimum of 8 feet and the depth clear of 6 feet. And the idea here is that um, you can make it bigger if you'd like. Some of the examples I was showing were a little larger, but the idea is that the space be functional to sit in, to be able to hang out there and enjoy the streetscape, which is the point. And often you've seen these kinds of elements added to buildings without these kinds of requirements. And what happens is the element is added in name, but not in function. And so people tend to not use those spaces. I mean, would they sit out there anyway if it was shallower? Maybe, I don't know. But they definitely get used when they're sizable to have furniture, a chair, or maybe a all-weather sofa out there. And so encouraging street interaction as well. And then a lot of requirements in cities don't distinguish between these elements and the building. And so they treat these elements as the building setback. And so what happens is the whole building gets pushed back into the lot, reducing housing yield. In this case, Sacramento is proposing that that not be counted toward the building, and so you can see the area A times B there, the porch or dooryard or stoop, whatever it is actually not counted, and it can project from the building facade, which is at the minimum setback, and it's allowed to project into the required setbacks, as you can see there on the bottom left. Next slide. Vehicles and parking. The biggest thing here is that we are making a distinction between the needs of circulation and parking on a lot that holds one or maybe two buildings at the most, as you see here on the left, and the needs of parking and circulation and on-site access for emergency vehicles on a parcel as big as the one on the right. And often public works and driveway requirements don't make this distinction, and so it's very difficult to redevelop smaller lots like the one on the left. And so city staff is still evaluating these reductions to the driveway width requirements, but it's heading in a good direction to make these distinctions as we're seeing here on the screen. Next slide. So multiple buildings on a parcel. This is a topic that gets talked about all over the country because, for all the reasons that you all know about producing more housing, more buildings sometimes fit on a parcel, but they don't always get fitted the best way they could have been fitted onto the lot to make a nice space, to make more of the neighborhood. And so the requirements here that we're proposing basically uh, locate parking away from the street, at least 50 feet away from the nearest street. And you can see here it's actually in the back. The driveways for this cottage court access the parking in the back, and then orient the buildings around a shared space and to the street. And the requirements spell all that out. And here you can see there are 5 two-story duplexes arranged around this garden, producing 10 units very nicely on this site. Next slide. And here's one of the outcomes that we're trying to avoid, just one of many examples. This is not in Sacramento, but there are examples like it all over the country where uh, the applicant was entitled to these 5 buildings to fit on this parcel, and this is what they did, and they met the requirements. And so, uh, as I mentioned, one of the big requirements key requirements to apply is the location of parking. And you can see on the right what the proposed standards would produce, and on the left what they would avoid. Next slide. So trees, the the idea here is to provide flexibility in the standards when a tree of a certain size is being protected. And so you can see here, depending on the size of the tree, or if you're planting a new type of size of certain tree, you can encroach a certain amount into the setback, either 5 feet or 10 feet. And that's a really nice piece of flexibility that that is needed because the trees, if they're being preserved, they exist in areas where it might not work out to meet all the standards. And so this provides flexibility to do that. Next slide. And this is about the amount of a number and size of trees that the ordinance will require, depending on whether or not you're an interior lot or have a side street as well on a corner lot. Next slide. So the open space, the idea here is that if you're within proximity, and in this case, we're proposing 1,000 feet. That's a short, 3 to 5 minute walk, depending on your pace of walking. Uh, that's if your lot is within 1,000 feet of an existing open space, not a school playground that is closed off to the public, but an actual open space, a park. And we're not saying how big that park has to be. It just has to be an existing open space. If it's within 1,000 feet, you don't have to provide any open space because of that. If you're not within 1,000 feet of open space, then the requirements here are on the left. In 1.0 areas, you would need to provide 125 square feet per unit, um, or 400 square feet total. In 2.0 areas, it's 75 square feet per unit or 400 square feet. So love your feedback on that as well. Next slide. So then the location of open space, here's that cottage court example again. Uh, a lot of times open space gets distributed across the site in the name of, making it interesting in the site plan or providing it near everybody's unit in a different way. But the requirements really encourage aggregating the space when possible, and so that it can be shared and viewed in this way of a cottage court. It's not the only way, but this is a great example of how to do that. And another part of the requirements is that the space be open to the sky and that it not be under covers and other other hindrances to just sunlight, and that it be planted in the ways that you see there with the features that you see listed on the screen. Next slide. And so again, depending on where you're locating your open space, the requirement is according to that. So if you're placing your open space in your front yard, it has to be at least 15 feet deep. In a street side yard, 10 feet. Interior side yard has to be at least 10 feet wide. Rear yard, 15 feet wide. Next slide. And then balconies and roof decks, they are not required, but if you want to add them to your building, then these are the requirements for balconies and then for roof decks. And they mainly have to do with where they're located on the building, depending on what the building is near. And you can see their balconies uh, on FAR 2.0 sites. Balconies are not proposed not to be allowed where abutting a 1.0 FAR site. Again, for the overviewing and those concerns. Next slide. And then just summing up here with these three examples again, the site visualizations that we prepared to both inform what the standards needed to be to produce these outcomes and to start to understand maybe where the standards needed to be finessed or adjusted a little bit. But you can see here this 1.0 area with this three-story sixplex fitting in nicely with a beautiful wide front porch facing the street and providing an area for people to hang out on the street and enjoy the streetscape. Next slide. And then this cottage court, again, in the top left, you can see the one-story version of that with the two-story duplex at the end of the garden. And again, that garden, it might not be big in terms of what people think of as a park, but it's not a park. It's a garden, and it gives this really beautiful address inside the lot to the buildings that face it. And it gives a feature for the pedestrian walking by that can see the garden inside and look across it and enjoy it. Next slide. And then the 2.0 visualization, as I mentioned, this parcel is 55 feet wide by 160 feet deep, and it yields a building of 4 stories in a transit proximate area. And as you can see, that upper missing middle scale goes far deeper into the lot than the other end of the spectrum. So that's it. And thank you for your attention on the standards and the summary of this. Look forward to your comments.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tony. And then I heard that the chat function isn't working for everyone. Feel free to use the Q&A feature, or you can request to speak and we can get your question that way. But I think Amy and Laura have been keeping an eye on the questions for Tony.
Hi, yeah, we've got one question so far. So where did all of these setbacks, etc., figures come from? From best practices or from somewhere else?
I can start. We definitely looked at lessons learned from our interim ordinance, and then Tony, any knowledge from best practices from your end in developing the standards.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so it's a combination of trying to, in the 1.0 areas especially, trying to match the setbacks that exist of the buildings that are adjacent to where we were studying. Let's say we picked an interior lot. What might the setbacks be of existing buildings, and what are those 20 feet, 15 feet? And then striking a balance at 15 feet minimum, being as close, because then that way you can still add a porch or dooryard or those other features that we were mentioning and still have land in front of that and not have the porch right on the sidewalk. In the 2.0 areas, we used 15 just because pushing the building further back into the lot really affected the housing yield And so we wanted to maximize housing yields, so we identified 15.
Great, thank you. Um, Next comment is just a comment that I'd like to elevate. It says, one of my favorite buildings in Sacramento are the fourplexes built in the 60s or 70s that have outdoor stairs, and the front is all balconies. They are all over Midtown. They're super efficient use of space, and I think they look really good and would fit in any neighborhood at least 2.0 areas. They would all scale really well to 3 to 4 story versions, and I worry this would limit those. Do you guys have any initial responses to that? Or we can go to the next question.
I mean, thanks for the comment. We're here to collect input on standards like that. Tony, you unmuted, so if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that again, I gave the reasons of why we are proposing the stair requirement, but again, that is in a lot of other places, and Sacramento might have, or it sounds like has a very different view of that, which isn't a concern. And so, great to hear that.
Great. We've got more questions. There seem to be many multifamily buildings in the core of Sacramento that were added in the 50s through 80s, despite the single family zoning you referred to. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, so the zoning was different in the central city. Probably, I mean, a lot of those are, yeah, it's a mix of like some were built earlier before the zoning change, and then also the central city zoning is different. A lot of the R1, R1A, R1B, R2 are like the single unit zones that we're talking about. Most of those are not within the central city. So, I mean, there's a little bit of it there, but most of it is outside of it. So that's the areas that we're talking about when we talk about missing middle housing.
Great. Next question. What is the definition of N1, N2, and N3?
A great question. So we'll cover it a lot more in our webinar next week, but when we say N1, we're simplifying all of our residential zones. So N1 is our single family zone, so R1 through R2. N2 is the next chunk of our multi-unit zones already, so R2A through R3A, and then N3 will be the mix of our higher intensity residential zones, so R4 through R5. But we'll talk about those more in depth at the webinar next week. But for missing middle housing, it's all within the N1 zone.
Great. Next question. Do all the proposed front setbacks leave space for a canopy tree large enough to shade the street and sidewalk? And there is a tree planting requirement in the front yard and street side yard for all of these building types, except the types with interior courtyards and gardens. I can also repeat that if helpful.
Yeah, no, it's a good comment. We're still coordinating with our sustainability and our urban forestry staff, excuse me, on the tree requirements. So yeah, we're still refining those numbers at this point.
Great, thank you. Next question. How many people attended this webinar? I can answer that. We had, over the course of the webinar, between 60 and 70 people join us, which is great. It's fantastic. All right, next question. Are there any incentives being offered for affordable home ownership? I can
Oh, go
tackle
ahead.
this if you wanted to. Okay. Yeah, and feel free to add on, Jamie, and
Yeah.
Remy and Greg also feel free to chime in. But I would say that as part of this project, we're not looking at incentives as part of our zoning code update. We do have a very robust housing element programs and policies that we've got a team working on all of those that do work on affordable housing. Yeah, did anyone else on the city team want to add to that?
I'll just say for SB 79, those standards still apply in a lot of the MMH areas that we're talking about. And to utilize those standards, you do have to provide affordable units over 10 plus units. So there is an incentive through that state law if affordable units are provided.
Awesome. All right. Next question. Can parking encroach into open space requirements?
No, that's not the intent. We want separation between parking and open space. I don't know, Tony, if you want to elaborate on that. No, okay, yeah. Intent is just no. We don't have separation of parking and open space.
Great. All right. Next question. Have you considered more objective standards for exterior stairways that are desirable or undesirable rather than just a flat no?
Not at this point, but Tony, I don't know if there's things you've seen in other cities.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, that we can certainly look into that.
Mhm.
Yeah, if that's the direction that people want to go in, we can definitely. It's very doable.
Great. All right. You guys have a lot of questions and we love this, so we'll keep going. Have all of these FAR housing proposals been used elsewhere successfully? If so, where?
I can only speak for City of Sacramento. Tony, are there other cities that have an FAR-based development, or are we kind of the only ones in this way with MMH?
You're the only ones that we know of that are only FAR. Cities use other combinations of things, other standards, but you're the only ones we know of that only use FAR solely like that. Hopefully there's a city that just did it yesterday and we don't know, right? But
Yeah. Yeah, with all
Great.
standards, we are looking at what FAR results from them and all of like the visuals that Tony shared too. They are being tested as we prepare them.
Great. Thank
by
you.
the way, can I just add to that? It's related. It's not an FAR thing per se, but the first visualization that we showed, the three-story sixplex, that's very, very similar to what's called the Spokane sixplex. Spokane, Oregon has a building type that's been built up there by, I think the name of the architecture firm is Cast Architecture, CAST, and they've been building that building type up there very effectively. And it's a three-story sixplex, and if that building fits nicely into the FARs that we've been showing you tonight for 1.0.
Wonderful. All right, next question. Would it be possible to include changes in exterior ornamentation, cornices, moldings, columns, forenses, etc., as one of the 5 alternatives to massing bricks in the FAR 2.0 areas?
Yeah, certainly. We didn't include it because the decoration in and of itself is expensive, and so we wanted to hear if that was a priority, and if it is, it certainly can be added as one of the could be a sixth option.
Great. Are there incentives for usable balconies? I feel like there's so many new builds in Portland. So many new builds in Portland have them and makes them so much less looming. So incentives for usable balconies.
Not
I
as,
would say, oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, there's not an incentive. I mean, they are allowed, and it is one option is one of the massing breaks. But there's not an incentive to provide a balcony in the standards currently.
And I would say that the provision of standards for balconies is also balanced with like sensitivity to neighbors. I think a lot of people have concerns of other people looking into other people's properties, and so there's a balance for sure on how we allow for usable balconies.
Mhm.
All right, next question. On the 2.0 FAR areas, a 15-foot setback does not allow space for a medium or large tree canopy. You would have to plant a columnar tree, columnar type tree with less than 15-foot spread. And yeah, as Jamie said, we're working with our sustainability and urban forestry staff to fine tune the details on this. This is definitely on our minds. Jamie, did you want to add anything?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Next question. Are there any additional standards when wanting to have a live-work building, say an antique shop on the ground floor and housing above? Are there setbacks the same? Are the setbacks the same for standard missing middle housing setbacks?
Yeah, so there was a webinar last week on it on neighborhood commercial uses. So we are looking at allowing more small scale commercial businesses in this zone where MMH will be, and then another zone, the N2 zone. Right now, the setbacks are the same as a zone. There's not different setbacks for those uses.
Great. Just maybe a few more questions. What is the general planning review process? Some type of administrative design review?
Yeah, so we're trying to create standards for staff level site plan and design review. It's a typical process that all of our new development or additions of things go through. And then if anyone wanted to deviate or exceed the standards that Tony just went over, that would require a director level public hearing process. So those would be the two pathways that your project could go down.
Great.
Amy, can I go back to the live work setback question real fast?
Yeah.
So just a recommendation.
Mhm.
What we found is that depending on where the lot is, so if it's mid-block, um, the setback shouldn't change so that the character doesn't change, right? But if we found that if you're, say, 2 lots or 3 lots from the corner or on the corner, then consideration should be given to consider that like a node and to let the building actually, the ground floor, come closer to the street, in exchange for not reducing the yield of housing, and to let that live workspace actually function as like a node, to let
Mhm.
people see it and let them have a sign and everything. So depending on where the location.
Yeah, that's helpful. We're looking at just corner lots right now, but that's definitely something we want to look into more. So I appreciate your input on that.
Great. See, we're at 3 minutes. So maybe two more really short questions. And then I know, Jamie, you have a few wrap-up slides for us. So what is the question is the tallest building 4 stories? And another question is, are there plans to build more missing middle housing in areas further away from transit?
Yeah, so for a fair 2.0, the max height would be 45 feet, which when you showed was around a 4-story building. And then the MMH standards apply. The 2.0 areas just is within a half mile of transit or quarter mile near transit. And then all the 1.0 areas are further from transit. So it does apply further from transit and close to. You just can build a bigger building closer to transit per the general plan.
Great. Thank you. I know folks have a lot of other questions on here. We will do our best to get around to them. We are putting out an FAQ, an update to our FAQ document that's currently on our webpage, and we'll do our best to incorporate some of these in there as appropriate. But thanks so much for everyone's participation and engagement. So I'll turn it back to you, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just a couple slides to wrap us up are in our outreach strategy. So we're doing a lot of outreach right now. This is one of them, carrying through August 31st. We reach out to different associations, different groups, have different webinars. We're sharing our updates and collecting our feedbacks, but this isn't the last chance to engage with us. You can also go to our project website at cityofsacramento.gov/zoning code update. And if there's a question or something we didn't get to tonight, you're welcome to leave it there, or you can email us at zoningcodeupdate@cityofsacramento.org. We also have a phone number. You can reach us and leave a voicemail at 916-808-5019. For missing middle housing specifically, we have what's known as the Conveyo board, or this poster online that you can leave comments on. You'll see folks have already left comments directly on the board, giving their opinion or question or things like that. We also have a survey specifically focused on missing middle housing. As you heard Tony talk about, one of the key changes is the height changes, getting rid of bolt control and having a 4th floor. So we want to collect input on that. So there's a survey specifically focused on that on the website as well. We also have a webinar next week on new zones and rezoning. So the questions I answered about N1, N2, and 3, what those all mean, will be covered next week. And you can register for that on our website. Again, everything you want and more is at cityofsacramento.gov/zoning code update. And then in the immediate future, we also have a workshop with the Planning and Design Commission on August 13th. We're going to provide them an overview of all the changes to the zoning code update, including the missing middle housing standards, and summarizing the community outreach and feedback we've gotten to date. You also can provide public comment there for that meeting, and we encourage you to do so. Following that meeting, we're going to take all of the input we've gotten and write the ordinance, and then we'll be back with the Planning and Design Commission in October, and then City Council in December for adoption. I'll leave this there on the slide if anyone needs it. Again, if you want to reach us, zoning code update, cityofsacramento.org, or call us there. We're collecting input through August 31st. This is a really big effort for the city, and it's really important that we get all of community feedback on it. So we really appreciate your time tonight. And if we didn't get to your question, feel free to email it to us and we'll do our best to respond to you. But thank you again so much. And thank you, Tony.